again to all you glorious, radiant beings out there tuning in and listening to us on Justice League Revisited Season 2. Here we go. A lot of you were just awestruck by I was awestruck. I'll leave it at that for our first season. But I think we got a lot of good feedback on the first season, so hopefully we're going to just carry that forward and just bring it even more strong in Season 2. When I say we are going to bring it strong, my co-host, the voice of Wonder Woman, Susan Eisenberg, bringing the strength. How are you?
I'm well, and I'm so happy to be back. I mean, I feel like we were on hiatus.
We were.
So I'm like,
we got
to pick up. We got to pick up. It's our second season. And thank you, everyone, for listening and for continuing to listen and for giving us questions when James posts this on our Twitter account and other social media platforms. And thank you for being here for Season 2. We're excited, and we're excited for our guest. We want to tell them who our guest is.
We can. This time we are talking to this particular episode's writer and the show producer, Rich Fogel. He's back for more.
He is, and we're so happy. And I mean, there's just something so special about hearing from the writers. We talk about it all the time, but not only is he a writer, he's the producer. And that is a whole other level of knowledge and experience that he brings to this conversation. So we're just so grateful he's agreed to do this again, that we didn't scare him off in Season 1, that he was willing to come back and share more insights and stories and let us know, how this all came to be. Season 2 of Justice League.
Long overdue having him back on. And to break down the stats, as we always do, this is the first story in Season 2. It is episodes 1 and 2 of the first season. Both aired together on this date, July 5th, 2003, after an 8-month hiatus between seasons. It not only has our normal voiced cast of our heroes, but guest starring in this one, Corey Burton as Brainiac and as Forager. Michael Ironside returns from Superman the Animated Series, voiced Darkseid. Renee Auberjonois as Desaad. Michael Dorn, Lieutenant Worf from Star Trek, as Calabac. We have Mitchell Ryan as Highfather. Ron Perlman as Orion, and the delightful Rob Paulson as Light Ray. I had Rob Paulson on my show a couple of years back, Susan, and I asked him about being Light Ray, his facelift. He goes, "Oh my gosh, that was so much fun being that character." So again, I think that's a testament to how great Andrea is at both casting and directing the voices.
Yeah, no, she hits it out of the park pretty much every time. And 8 months. See, I didn't realize that. I did not realize. So, wow, 8 months of just, limbo there, right? Waiting to find out if there was a second season. And phew, I'm so glad there was.
Yeah, second, and then we got Justice League Unlimited. If only they knew back then how popular this show would be.
That we'd be talking about it all these years later.
Right. So yeah, with that in mind, that's some of the questions I've got for him as far, what did you guys do during your downtime? Was it a pool party at Bruce Timm's house? What happened in the off season? So we'll ask him all that.
Let me just say I can answer that question, and the answer is no.
Oh.
There was no pool party at Bruce Timm's house.
Oh, okay. So he doesn't have a pool, or Bruce can't swim. Which is it?
I won't say.
Okay,
I won't tell.
We'll leave it at that. That being said, very excited to welcome him back to the show. Rich Fogel, writer of this episode. It's so great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me. I can't believe you invited me back.
We had to. Oh, my gosh. And I was looking ahead at the episode list. I think we're going to have to lean on you even more this second season because you had so much to do with so many of the stories.
Yeah, it was a real handful. I thought that we practically killed ourselves in the first season, and then we had to scale the mountain again.
And you guys started so big. I mean, Brainiac and Darkseid. I mean, that's about as big as you can go. And I love obviously, if someone was not familiar with Superman the Animated Series, this might be a little difficult for people to pick up on, but you addressed enough stuff where people got the gist of it, even if they'd never seen it. Was that a hard line to walk?
Well, let me back up and give you a little background of how the story was developed initially.
I'm really curious because, frankly, I was a little lost. Because I did watch Superman the Animated Series, And there was just a lot to unpack. So I'm so glad you're here to unpack it for us. Yeah, I would love to know how this all came about, this storyline, what that meeting was like. Please tell us.
Yeah, well, we finished up the first season on a big note with the 3-parter, and at that point we didn't know for sure whether we were coming back for a second season or not. But in order to sort of ensure against falling about too far behind again, they commissioned one script for the second season to sort of have that in the bag for in case we got a pickup. So we needed to come up with a story.
Who's they when you say they?
Cartoon Network.
Okay. Thank you.
Warner Brothers commissioned the script. Cartoon Network was trying to decide whether we were going to get picked up or not.
Okay.
So, and Warner Brothers was reluctant to spend any money at all under the new regime. They were watching every penny of it, and they were changing the way that they paid for the work that was being done. Under the first season, we were under a staff arrangement where you're basically paid weekly until the show is done. In the second season, they wanted to switch it to a per episode basis. So basically you're doing freelance. I was, my contract basically finished at the end of the first season. And instead of renegotiating the contract, they sort of said, well, we're going to ignore any promises that we made before, and we're going to give you this new deal, take it or leave it. So, but they did pay for this one advanced script, which was going to become Twilight. And we were thinking about what to do. And I came up with this idea of doing Darkseid and Brainiac because it seemed like a natural to me that you've got two big Superman villains who are powerful enough individually to challenge the Justice League. And if you have them intersect with each other, that it had the potential for being a really big story. Bruce was very reluctant to do it at first for two reasons. One was that he's very protective of Jack Kirby and the Fourth World things, and he didn't like the idea of mixing it with other Superman mythos. And the other thing was that he didn't want it to feel like a Superman episode, like just another Superman episode. He wanted it to be a Justice League episode. And so his stipulation was, well, he understood the strength of those two villains and how compelling we could make that story. But he said, we'll only do it if it's not a Superman story. And I was like, what? What do you mean? And so he said, I want it, we haven't done a Hawk Girl story, so let's make it a Hawk Girl story. And I'm like, okay. So we wrote the outline, and I wrote the script while I was away on hiatus. And then they picked up the show and they said, come on back in. And Bruce was like, I don't know, there's something not working about this episode. And he gave me notes and I rewrote it. We tweaked some things here and there. And all of the, the Brainiac and the Darkseid stuff was working like gangbusters, but he still was not on board entirely with the story. And I'm sitting there going, well, the problem is we need to be focusing more on Superman. And he was resistant to that idea. And so we kept going sort of around and around in circles. And finally it came to the point where we were supposed to, be recording it and getting this thing off the ground. And he literally the night before we were supposed to do it, he sat down and did a rewrite of basically a dialogue polish on it. And he just sort of tweaked things around so that there was a little more emphasis on Superman, a little more focus on his anger and his relationship with Darkseid, which was in the script all along, but it had been sort of receded because of this mandate that he had because of Hawk Girl. And so by plussing that, it finally brought it back into balance, and he was happy. But there was a lot that sort of went into that. During the off season, Bruce was starting to get feedback on what we had done in the first season. And we got very clearly the note that Superman was a wimp. And it was not something that was intentional on our part. And I will defend everything that we did, but there was something that we didn't quite understand. There was a difference between Justice League and Superman, which is both Tim and George got beat up an equal amount. There was not more for one or the other. But in Superman, the series, what happened was that he got the crap beaten out of him, and then he got up and he fought back and he fought back until he won. In Justice League, because we had other heroes, when he got knocked down, the other heroes ran in and filled in the vacuum. And so you didn't get that super moment of him pulling himself together and rejoining the fight. I mean, and he would rejoin the fight, but only after he had been knocked out, and people would go, well, he's weaker than he was before. Well, no, that wasn't the case. It was just a question that we were not tracking his story or his portion of the battle as much. And so therefore it appeared like he was weak. So we needed to sort of rebalance that. And so Bruce was very much on we've got to toughen Superman up. We've got to toughen him up. And so in this, he really went far in terms of toughening Superman up. And I will give Bruce credit that I think one of his superpowers as a producer is his ability to self-scout. That he'll look back at the things that we've done and he'll say, can we do it better? Is there something we could have done better? And then not be able to shift directions. And Glenn Murakami was talking about that before with you guys, that they were not afraid to redesign the characters just because, they looked one way before didn't mean that they couldn't change the way that they looked. And in this case, the way that we were handling Superman, just because we had gone down one path didn't mean that we couldn't adjust and go another direction with it. So I give him all credit for that. Given the sort of last minute rewrite that there was on this, I think that to my ear, a lot of that dialogue sort of grates. It's a little bit dissonant to me. And it's like, I wish we'd had time to do one more pass and sort of find a middle ground, because it felt to me like, it was a little too much in places. And particularly with some of the Superman stuff, we spent a lot of time discussing whether we could leave in the greasy fist line. And, it's effective. I'll grant you that, but it also is a moment where you sort of go, whoa, yeah, okay, with it. And then his handling of some of the dialogue with Wonder Woman and Batman on New Genesis. He played them a little bit more of the sort of quippy tourists than being awestruck by the majesty of New Genesis, which was sort of where I felt it would have been more appropriate. So a lot of that sort of interaction between Bats and Wonder Woman on that feels a little glib to me in that episode. But, we were out of time and it was sort of the best we could do. But this is why Bruce got a writing credit on this episode, was because he did this sort of last minute dialogue polish on these those parts of the story.
I was curious what brought that about.
Yeah, me too. And it's also so interesting to have this context, because it did feel very much like Superman was asserting himself in a way that I hadn't quite seen him do that before. And it felt like, Superman got the note that he was a little wimpy, and he was making the adjustment for himself, like wimping. But but I have to say, I love, and what I think that the show is so brilliant at consistently are these other small stories, these moments with Hawkgirl and Jean talking about their separateness, and when he says all of us, Wonder Woman and me and you, we're all. I love those moments, those intimate moments, and I so appreciated them because this episode did have so much testosterone, if you will.
Yes.
There was something really lovely about having that balanced with these intimate discussions. And I did like that Wonder Woman and Batman were off together. You know, like I thought that was like, oh, okay, here we are. Look at us.
Yeah, and it was also something that Bruce was a little bit nervous about, and I think that's why he focused on trying to polish some of that, was that this is the first time that Batman had gone off-world. He'd been in Gorilla City before, but that's on Earth. But, the idea of Batman in space really is sort of like way different from Batman the Animated Series, and so how would Batman react being in this, literally walking among gods? And, that was a challenge.
That's one of the lines I wrote down. I loved it. They look up and he says, "I'm going to need a longer grapple." That was, I laughed out loud.
Well, I just so appreciated that line. I really did.
Yeah. So there was a lot of good stuff in the episode. Personally, I sort of wish it had been a 3-parter because I felt like it was a little crammed in there, that we had so much story that we were cramming into 2 parts there, that particularly some of the stuff on New Genesis gets a little bit short shrift, I think. But the sort of mechanics, the sort of Swiss watch works of that particular story I'm still amazed that we were able to get it to work.
When's the last time you had watched it?
Well, until a couple of days ago, I hadn't watched it for a few years, but,
wow.
It's always one that I was really proud of because I'm a big Kirby fan, and being able to, this was the first time that we had really spent any time in New Genesis. We had spent some time in the Superman series on Apocalypse, but New Genesis was only glimpsed. And so I really liked the fact that we were able to spend some time there, spend some time with the new gods. And I, originally there had been a lot more with Forager and a lot more with the gods and stuff like that. And that had to get jettisoned because of time.
Yeah, I love what you do with Forager. Those little moments that even when he saves Bruce and Diana, and it was. I'm so used to seeing Forager now in Young Justice, and it's a vastly different take on Forager. But I kind of go back and I really appreciate it. And it is very Kirby-esque, to your point. Yeah.
So it was interesting looking at it this time. I realized that a huge part of my influence of that part of the story was Fritz Lang's Metropolis. That the relationship between the gods and the people down below is very much the same message as it is in Metropolis. And so I was basically doing my sort of extrapolation of that idea through the new gods. And, I thought that added a lot of depth to that world, because otherwise you've got, these people living in a golden city and like, what are they doing there?
Right.
But I think the fact that you even have, when you talk about depth, I think the reason we're talking about the show all these years later, and the reason why fans are still watching the show in like as part of their morning ritual before work, is because of that depth. I think the fact that all of you were so literate, all of you writers and directors, you brought all of that to the show. And I think that depth is why it's endured, really. I mean, and truly.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for doing that. Well done.
It's a real privilege privilege to be able to sort of have an opportunity to work with those characters and to, add to the mythos a little tiny bit. It's nice that those contributions are appreciated.
I'm curious because we always, I know it's been said, I think you may have said it, I'm sure Dan said it, Stan probably said it, that in the length of a story, there's only so many of the characters you can service. And obviously when you're bringing in a bunch of people from New Genesis and Apocalypse, I'm curious, between the writing that you talked about, the back and forth with you and Bruce on this, having it a Hawkgirl story, we already saw that chemistry start to form with her and John. Was there a reason that Green Lantern and Flash were left out of this one particularly?
Again, it's a question of just casting who's going to be in what role in the story and who will have something to contribute. Now, certainly in fighting Darkseid and Brainiac, Flash and Green Lantern certainly would have been helpful. But again, it would have required it to be a three-parter in order to make room for that. And so, we basically pared it down to, we have the Jean Hawkgirl moments, which is important because we hadn't done any backstory on Hawkgirl on screen before. And we knew that we were going to have to do that in order to set up the finale of season 2, which we already knew we were going to be doing. So Bruce said it's time that we need to sort of get people thinking about that. But we had to do it in such a way that it wasn't tipping anything. So it was a real fine line to walk there. So we had that pair that we were dealing with, and then we had Batman and Wonder Woman because we liked that pairing. And, again, even though Bruce was uncomfortable with it, we thought the idea of Batman being out of his element would be a fun thing to explore. And then Superman sort of being in the middle of all of this with his adversaries and his relationship with Bruce in that story, that was really all we could handle. So sure, it would have been fun to have Green Lantern along, and Flash. They're always wonderful to have there. But, again, just in terms of the Swiss watch mechanics of the story, we just couldn't fit that in without gumming up the works.
I enjoyed watching Wonder Woman support Batman in the air. I thought that,
yes.
I just loved that. It was such a role reversal and in terms of gender, and I just so appreciated it. I have to ask you a question though, because you said that when season 1 was over, you were kind of all left up in the air. You were promised this one episode, so you came back to do that. You were there to do that. But when you got the renewal and you were told, okay, we're going to, Cartoon Network is going to order a new season of the show, can you take us into the room a little bit and talk about what your vision was and like how that materialized, that vision for the second season?
That gives a little bit more intentionality than I think that there probably was at that point. Okay. What happened was I had written the outline for the episode before I left on hiatus, and then they called and they said, "Okay, we need this script, but you're not starting again until whatever it was, January, February, something like that. But we need the script before that." So I was at home writing the script over the holidays. And then it wasn't until I was back in the office that we sort of finalized it. And so at that point, I had not had any meetings with Bruce. I had not had any meetings with Stan, or we were negotiating with Dwayne to come on board, but he was He was still in Florida at that point and was on the fence about whether he wanted to move out here or not. And so literally we came in with nothing in the hopper in terms of the arc of the season or the stories or anything like that. We knew that we wanted to end up with the big Hawk Girl arc at the end of the season. That we knew. But anything in between that, we had no idea. And we were just going to try and come up with stories along the way. Now, again, sort of to the notion of Bruce doing self-scouting. He looked back at the scripts from the previous season. And before I left at the end of the first season, he sort of patted me on the back and he said, this is really, I think, in Batman and Superman and even Batman Beyond, it took us a long time to figure out the show. And he said, this season, I think, of Justice League is the most consistent that we've done on any of these shows. There wasn't a stinker in the bunch. And so I felt really good about that. But when I came back, he had been going over some of the scripts and looking at it and thinking about it. And he felt like there was some meat left on the bone, that we had sort of there were some things that we could have done better. But again, because of the changes in the administration at Warner Brothers and the amount of money that they were willing or not willing to spend on the writing, I didn't have the staff to devote to developing these things to the level that would have satisfied Bruce. And so we changed what we were doing in the second season, where we started having in-person meetings in my office that were basically like story summits, where before I was responsible solely for the story work, and Bruce and Glenn and James were doing basically the art and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. We got together and sort of made a brain trust. And so every episode from the second one on, I think we all sat down and really hashed it out in a writer's room kind of setting. And that included Bruce and Stan and James, and Glenn was gone by this time. And when Dwayne came aboard, he came there, and then me. So, the five of us would sit around in my office, and we would go through every single line, every single beat of those stories, and we would, try and do the best that we could. And there was a lot of fighting in the room. There was a lot of debate about, what's better, what's this, what's that, and all of that. And as the sort of head writer on the thing, I was a little conflicted because, I had done the best that I could in the first season. And I was like, what, you don't think I'm doing good enough, whatever. But on the other hand, I appreciated the help because, it was too much for one person to do everything. And so by getting the brain trust together and getting everybody on the same page, I think we were able to sort of up the level of execution on there, and hopefully the stories were stronger as a result.
James,
yes,
I know that we put it out there that Rich was going to be on today.
We did,
and we put it on social media, Rich, that you were coming back. And
you got crickets back, I'm sure.
No, so subsequently we got some questions.
Quite the opposite.
Quite the opposite. You guys, the most unassuming people in the world, you are writers for these shows. And but yeah, we did have some questions, and I was wondering, James, do you want to take a few and okay, great,
sure,
because I'd love for the fans to be able to ask Rich a few questions.
Of course. One of the fans of both our show and Justice League, at Girl with Cello on Twitter, says, very glad to have Mr. Fogel on the podcast again. What were some aspects that made Twilight unique to write? I think you've covered some of those, just being the first episode and you had to have it in advance, but were there anything else that really kind of you wanted to lock in to kind of kick the season off with a bang? And also, what do you like about writing in general?
Yeah. Okay. I think one of the things that struck me watching the episode again was the cold opening on Apocalypse, where Darkseid's forces are decimated. I thought was really great for setting up the story, because he comes into the thing at a low point. He is like on the ropes. You think there's no way he's going to be able to get out of this. And then you find out that he's got, he's playing 4-dimensional chess, that he's all these steps ahead of everybody else. And it makes him a really interesting character to write, and that you never know sort of like whether you can take him at his word. Is he lying? Well, he's not lying, but he's not telling the entire truth. And, he's bending everything to his advantage. So he makes a great layered villain. And the fact that we were able to sort of we were never able to follow up with Superman on like how he dealt with the fallout from Legacy in the Superman episode. And so this was our chance to sort of address that issue. I think we addressed it pretty well.
Yeah, I'd say, and I didn't even think about that, but man, because it opens, he sacrifices Steppenwolf. Desaad is questioning his motives, and he strikes Desaad down. And then you kind of lose track of that and all the big stuff that's going on. And then when you're talking about the episode later, it's like, wow, he sacrificed a lot just to lure Superman to Brainiac. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, but he had this ultimate goal of achieving the anti-life equation, which again was a challenge because Kirby never actually identified what the anti-life equation was. And so there's a lot of interpretation about it. And it was interesting when I was working on Young Justice, they have a whole different take on what the anti-life equation is. And it was like, I said to Greg, "Oh, you've got a better solution for anti-life equation than we did."
Yeah, it was amazing. All the Kirby stuff. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of the original Mr. Miracle series. Even when Marshall Rogers took over the book, love that entire run. Watchtower Database asks, "What was Darkseid's fate at the end meant to be the final time we see him, or did you guys always know you'd bring him back one way or another?"
Well, because it happens off screen, it always is an open question. And it was really a question of, if we brought him back, we would certainly be able to do that. If we didn't bring him back, it would be a very satisfying end to that story. And so we sort of, we left it where it needed to be left for this particular story. And it left the door open for us for the rest of it.
And on Twitter again, @TheRealShuban wants to know, did you know Michael Ironside was coming back as Darkseid, and did that decision for him to come back, not have to replace him with a different voice actor, make it easier to write his dialogue as a result?
Well, I don't remember that there was any discussion that Michael wouldn't come back, because for us, he was Darkseid. I mean, I could not imagine anybody else delivering those lines. And, I don't know if you remember in the room, Susan, but it gave me chills when he delivered those lines.
It gave me chills watching it again. I mean, when I was watching it for this, for this interview, wow, so good. I mean, it really, watching these actors do what they do so well, it just, I so much applause to him for doing that character like that. Brilliant.
But, I remember him coming in and, I was like, oh boy, what are we going to get here? And he read it and I was just like, wow.
Wow.
I forgot about that last line that he gives before Brainiac's headship, spaceship, asteroid, whatever it was, blows up, when Superman and Batman boom tube off, and Darkseid just kind of smiles and goes, "Loser." I laughed out loud again because I forgot about that line. It was brilliantly delivered.
Yeah, it really was. So great work there.
At Steely Dill, DYL on Twitter asks, were there any villains you wanted to team up that you didn't get to? And also, was anyone opposed to the Superman wanting to leave Darkseid as just a greasy smear on your fist, as you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, well, like I said, it was a lot of sort of going back and forth. And Bruce was like, is this too far? And I was like, I'm not real comfortable with it, but I see where it works. And James was like, I don't know, and all this. And so where we came down with was, let's try it. Let's try it and see. And George was able to deliver it in a very convincing way. And it must have been a lot of fun for him to get some of that Superman anger out in that episode.
Yeah, the dialogue, the fight was kind of reminiscent, as I'm thinking back through the series, of the very final episode of Justice League Unlimited, where Superman's just like, I'm always holding back. I'm in a world made of cardboard, but you can take it. And he really just unleashes. Like, he burned those holes through Darkseid's foot when it was on his face. It felt very much like that fight again, or previous, I should say.
Yeah, well, it was funny because with each confrontation between Darkseid and Superman, we always had to sort of keep upping the ante. And so, like, in the first time he meets Darkseid, they actually never do have a physical confrontation.
Right.
And so it's not until Legacy that they really have a knockdown drag out. And it was pretty epic. And so then we came back and we're like, well, we can't just repeat ourselves. What are we going to do? And I can't remember who came up with the burning is through the boot thing. Whether it was Bruce or whether it was James, but we were like, yeah, that's something we haven't seen before. That'd be great.
Yeah. Talk about a hot foot. Wow.
Well, and another thing that I really appreciate about the episode, like I said, with, Jean and Hawkgirl, I just love the relationship between Batman and Superman in the show.
Yeah.
There is something so brotherly and, with all that implies. So in other words, it's not like, it's just, two guys who get along great. It's two guys who really can go at each other and know each other very well. And I loved that conflict when Batman tries to stop him and he's like,
well,
get out of my face, basically. And it was so powerful.
Well, it's interesting that, in a sense, both of them are right in this story. Mm-hmm. Superman is absolutely right not to trust Darkseid. He is absolutely right that they need to finish him or there are going to be bad consequences down the road. And Batman is also right, saying you can't let your anger at this one guy get in the way of the lives of millions of people. Right. And Batman is about justice. And so he's like trying to keep Superman in that thing. So they both have legitimate points of view in this thing. And it's a question of how do they work it out? And
it's also like ego comes into these characters. It comes up a lot for these characters. And I love when, the greater good is brought to the fore. Like, yeah, you have a personal beef with this person, but that's not what's most important here. What's most important, right? And so, you may, and I feel like with all of the characters, there was always that moment where their own ego had to be checked for the greater good.
Yeah, and that's always the challenge of dealing with this. And I said this last time that we were on, that our mantra from the beginning was, this is not Super Friends. We're not doing Super Friends, where they're all just sort of getting along and doing good things and all of that. That they all have their own viewpoints. They all have their own weaknesses. They all have their own points of pride and stuff like that. And the more that those come in conflict with the rest of the team, the better the story is going to be.
Yeah, definitely not Super Friends, because I was thinking during this episode, boy, in the good old days in the 70s and 80s when Darkseid just wanted to make Wonder Woman his bride, that was his whole motive. This is a little different, a little more true to the actual comic books, which I enjoy.
Glad I dodged that
Yeah,
bullet.
yeah. So
Think of the dowry he would have
I
had
don't
for
know.
you, though, Diana. Come on.
Oh no, I already went
Yeah.
through the whole thing with Hades. Like enough already with
It's
the,
true.
with that. I mean, that was dark enough with, that Hades episode. God.
Speaking of Wonder Woman, I was curious because it was a blink and you miss it moment when Diana and Bruce first arrive on New Genesis and they encounter Light Ray, and you see that off-camera slap. Was that
Yep.
like a little tushy slap that Light Ray gave Orion that gave Wonder Woman? And how does Light Ray still have his
Yes.
hands?
Yes.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah, and
She
it
was-
did happen, and it happened off camera, which was interesting.
Yeah. Well, her reaction in it was priceless. I thought it's like she could not believe that just happened.
Right. I was like, oh, was that what I think it was? But I was.
Well, Themyscira's looking better and better every day.
I wanted to go back and talk about Superman a little bit more for a moment in terms of his level of vulnerability in both the Superman show and in Justice League. People complain a lot because he's not as strong as he is in the comic books sometime. And we felt like we were pretty consistent with his power level in the show. But I had a sort of rule of thumb that I applied to it that was based on something that was a Harry Houdini trick. Famously, Harry Houdini at parties and things had a trick that he would do where he would challenge somebody to punch him in the gut. And he had very strong abs. And so he would tighten those muscles and they would punch him in the gut and he wouldn't feel anything because his muscles were so hard. But there was a story, I'm not sure whether it's true or not, but there was a story where somebody came up to him and hit him by surprise when he wasn't ready. And it injured his liver.
Ooh.
Because he was not expecting that blow. And so that was sort of my sort of touchstone for dealing with Superman. That if he was braced and ready for something that was taking him on, that he could pretty much take on almost anything. But if something hit him sideways, if it was something that was hitting him when he was not prepared, that it could knock him for a loop. He was able to be injured. And, we see Superman bleed, so he's not invulnerable, but he's very, very strong. And it has more to do with his ability to take a punch and how he takes a punch that relates to sort of what level of damage or how much he's caught off guard. And so that was sort of my approach to dealing with Superman.
And we all have the capacity to get our asses kicked in the show. Like we all do. We all get hurt. We all get, thrown down to the ground. I mean, all that ADR.
Yeah.
I mean, and so that's interesting.
But if you look at the staging, a lot of times Superman gets taken down from things that he wasn't expecting.
Right.
Yeah, I noticed in the very first episode of the two-parter that when he's going into, Brainiac's blasting him and he's kind of pushing back, both the color and the way he was doing it was very much reminiscent to me of the old Fleischer Superman. Was there inspiration kind of taken from that? As he's kind of that fantastic clip they show where he's kind of pushing back the beam and punching at it as he comes up from the ground? That sequence reminded me quite a bit of the Fleischer Superman.
Absolutely. I mean, we were definitely going for that. But again, he's doing that. He's focusing on that. And if something hits him from another direction, then he's going to have a problem dealing with it.
Yeah, now that you say that, I'm watching the episode back in my mind. And I totally see what you're saying because a lot of the things that were getting him were the ones that he wasn't expecting.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Makes sense now. It all makes sense. This is why we need Rich.
There's always a moment in every episode, James, where I realize that I was so smart to do this with you because that whole Fleischer reference that's when I know, okay, I'm doing this podcast with the right person.
I'll send you the video clip if you haven't seen it, Susan, but they just restored part of it, and it's just beautiful animation.
All right, I'd love to see it. Thank you.
Yeah.
The old Superman cartoons are just, the Flashers are just amazing. And they're short, they're only 11 minutes long. But they are beautifully done artistically, and great stories, and a lot of fun.
I was curious, as the writer, because every time the new cast members are kind of brought in, some people say, yeah, I wasn't in for this casting session. And some people, yeah, I was in for it. Some people say I didn't need to be in for it. For the new episode leading into the second season, were you part of the casting process of, hey, we're going to bring in Renee for Desaad? Because he didn't voice him in Superman the Animated Series. It was a different actor, but we're bringing back Michael Dorn as Calabac. We're bringing back Michael Ironside, or, hey, we've got, Rob Paulson wants to do Light Ray. Were you part of the casting?
No, I wasn't. I mean, I know that the general preference was that, if the actors were available who had done it before, that they would try and reuse them. With Rob, I think that they needed some flexibility with voices, and he's very good. So, if there were any background things that needed to be done, he could pitch in on that and all of those. And, it's always great to have Rob in the room. He is such a delightful guy and such a bubbly, uplifting presence in the room that my history with him goes back all the way to Smurfs.
Oh, wow.
That's great.
I worked with him in Smurfs, and a character that that we introduced in Gummy Bears was one of the early voices that he had done, and he just is delightful. A real great guy.
He certainly is. And, we referenced, I think during the show, or maybe it was before we started, about Glenn's episode, Glenn Murakami.
Yes.
Was there anything when you were listening to that episode that sparked memories for you when you were hearing him go into details about certain things? Were you like, oh, wow, I remember when that happened?
Yeah. It was interesting with Glenn that it started with the four of us in a room, me and Bruce and James Tucker and Glenn Murakami. And Bruce and Glenn had been very closely working together in Batman the Animated Series. And so they had a real shorthand in terms of talking about what they were doing. So while the four of us were sitting around and talking, we would get very enthusiastic about some ideas. And Glenn was not always on the same page. He was always a little bit sort of reluctant, going, well, I don't know. Do we want to do that? All of that. And at some point he realized he was not on the same page as the rest of us in terms of how we saw this show going. As he mentioned, his vision of it was closer to what he did in Teen Titans. And so he made the decision to sort of back away a bit from the story development aspect and focus on production and design and stuff like that, and not worry about that. But sort of like towards the end of the first season, his heart was really not in it that much. And he and I sat down and talked, and he was like, well, how do you know how to develop stories? How do you do this? And I gave him a little bit of advice. I mean, he didn't need much advice, but I think that was him laying the groundwork for going off on his own to do Teen Titans. And so sort of he recused himself as he went along from Justice League. And I don't think it was that he didn't like what we were doing. It was just that it wasn't where his heart was leading him.
That's a great point. That's a great way to look at it too. And what he really gave in that interview to me and me and James was how, when people were like, why weren't the seven of you on more? And what it meant to build these scenes, how intense it was to build these moments design wise, and what effort it took to do that. And it gave me a huge appreciation, which is one of the reasons we wanted to do the podcast, because there's so much about the show that the fans don't know about. You know, what they see on the screen and the effort that goes into what they see on the screen is, you know, there's a lot of stories there.
Yeah. I mean, like with the last episode of the first season, which again was epic, that was really Butch Lukak's baby. He is a World War II fan. He lives and breathes that stuff. And he did a lot of the action scene, the boarding himself. And I remember one day that we came in and sat down with him to give some notes on the storyboard. And he was just exhausted because he had stayed up all night revising the boards and doing it and getting it to be, you know, the most epic that it could be. And when we started giving notes, he was just like, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I just have nothing left to give on this. And it was like, okay, Bruce, I mean, okay, Butch, it's fine. You know, you go with it. You know, but that's the level of commitment that people had to the show.
It shows. It shows. Yeah.
And, you know, we were all working on it. We all had a real passion and a feeling that we were doing something that was, if not important to us, you know, important to us as fans to try and do the best that we could with it.
And one last question before we let you go. I'm curious, obviously you mentioned at the very beginning, this was, you know, drafted up to hopefully if we get picked up for a second season. Do you remember at what point you were greenlit, and then how quickly the other episodes, like, okay, we already know our outline, and how quickly did you guys get to work after this pickup?
Well, as I said, the pickup, when they gave me the green light to write the script, it was over the Christmas holidays. And I think I was back in the office by January, the end of January, maybe. And at that point, the schedule had already been drawn up, and we had deliveries like every 2 weeks or something like that on the episode. So we really had to just sort of hit the ground running and crank out these stories. And, you know, again, I didn't have a writing staff, you know, beyond Stan. And, you know, we were hoping to get Dwayne on board. And it was a monumental task. And, you know, by the time I finished Justice League, I was done. I had nothing left in the tank, but, you know, I'm real proud of the work that we did on it. And, you know, and I'm glad that we're still talking about it 20 years later.
We're glad you're talking about it with us. This is so much fun to pick your brain.
It is. It is. And I know the fans will love it because I just did a Comic-Con this past weekend, and the feedback from the show, people are loving hearing the inside baseball stories of all of this. And we can't thank you enough for being a part of this. It makes us so happy.
I think it's nice that it's available and sort of featured on Max right now, that people have a way to see it, a way to find it. And, you know, that creates a whole new audience. So,
and Netflix. I think it's also streaming on Netflix.
Oh, is it?
Well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, Rich, thank you so much for joining us again. And we do have you on speed dial, so we will be calling you again, if that's okay. Not to put you on the spot, but kind of to put you on the spot. Would you come back for another episode down the road? Because, you know, we love hearing your insights.
I'll be back.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, guys, and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
Coming back on the show again, another just all the information, like some of that stuff I had no idea. And I think it's always great to hear from the writers.
It's great. And it's great to hear from the people that were behind the scenes making this stuff happen. And I'm so grateful that he is amenable to coming back. I think we did it we have a recording of him saying he'll come back again. So that's good.
Exhibit A, Your Honor.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's just, I think, I've met a lot of these guys now and these women, and I think they're really surprised at their own popularity. I don't think they really understand how valued they are and how much curiosity there is. And as somebody who does Comic-Cons, and I really hear from the fans so much, there is so much curiosity. So lucky us, right? That we get to hear from Rich and Stan, and hopefully we'll hear from Bruce we'll hear from Bruce and James Tucker, and we'll hear more. But gosh, I mean, I could have him on every other episode and just hear the inside baseball stuff. It's fantastic.
Yeah, we need to try to get Butch on here at some point. We'll have to try to reach out, because he's one person we haven't talked to yet, and we kind of tried, but he's hard to get a hold of. The elusive Butch Lukic.
That would be awesome to have him on.
Yeah.
We really need him. We really do.
That'll be one of our sticking points for season 2. So if listeners, you're hearing it now, hold our feet to the fire on this and be like, hey, when are you going to get Butch?
But it was lovely to start the second. Here we are. We have something in the can for the second season.
Yes, we do.
Look at us.
Yeah. And it was a good one to start with. Like I said, that the show started strong. Darkseid.
Yeah, it did.
Brainiac coming out. Come on.
I know. And we had Hawkgirl and Martian Manhunter and Batman and Wonder Woman. So it wasn't, just Superman's story. It was Superman's story and all of our other, we were all there too. So I like that. I like that we were all around.
Yeah. A good ensemble piece.
Yes, James. Well said.
Thank you.
Good ensemble piece.
I do show up every once in a while with a gem here and there.
Talk about showing up. That whole Fleischer thing. Look at you.
I've never been
video. I was so proud.
I got to send you that video, because it was a gorgeous shot that I saw. And I was like, man, that looks just like the Fleischer. And so I'll send you the link off after we get off the call here.
I don't know if, the fans won't be able to see my face when you said that, but I was just, I was so I was filled with pride at my for my co-host having such a brilliant remark. And, as you were saying it, Rich was shaking his head. Yes. You spotted it. And, this is why I love that you bring the geeky. I love it.
That's me.
Well done.
That's me. Mr. Geek.
Hey, it served you well.
It has so
Geek
far.
To Be Radio. It has done well for you. Have done very well with that.
So far. And speaking of, we may as well go ahead and wrap this up. This might be your first jumping on point to the series, our show. So thank you very much. The great thing is you've got an entire season to go back and listen to with all the great guests that Susan and I have had on. So make sure you check that out. If you want to find more about me, geektomeradio.com. That's GEEKTO. meradio.com, and you can see all the past episodes I've done, and you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Geek2Me Radio. Give my YouTube page a look, youtube.com/Geek2Me Radio. We are on a fast track. We just crossed the 750 subscriber mark. We're powering through to 1,000, so if you haven't already checked me out there, please do so. We do a weekly show, I should say, every Sunday, 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, with a new pop culture guest. By the time this one will drop, you should be able to hear my interview with Nicole Maines. We're talking Suicide Squad Dream Team. So make sure to check that out every Sunday.
And, for those of you who are just discovering us, please go back and listen to season 1, and also subscribe to the podcast and leave a review, because it is so important to us to hear from you in reviews. And also the subscribers really help us. There's a technical reason why that helps, and you mention it sometimes, James.
Search engine optimization.
Thank you. It's what James said. And if anyone wants to find me, I'm on social media at Susan Eisenberg 1. And also I have a website, SusanEisenbergVoice.com, where you can find out where I'll be appearing for Comic-Cons. And also these episodes from our podcast are on there as well. So Apple, Spotify, my website, there's no excuse for you not to be listening to this podcast, right?
I agree.
Right.
No
okay.
excuses.
All right.
You heard it from Wonder Woman.
All right. So there we go. Another one in the can. And I am just so happy to say the conversation continues.